Welcome back to the Sports Business Take, your home for sports industry news with a little personality. I'm Paul Hine. He is Zach Creekmore. How you doing today, Zach?
I'm doing good today, Paul. How you doing, brother?
Good, dude. I'm so happy that you got a mic. I'm actually super excited. That's awesome. You sound pristine. I love it.
I appreciate that. I'm excited too. I've been like staring at the Amazon cart for months, and you sit there and you're like, "Am I gonna bite the bullet?"
Do I want to spend the money? Yeah. Okay. So
And I can be reserved, but then I go and I spend the money on other things, and I'm like, "What am I doing? I should just go and buy the mic."
yeah. No, I got you. I actually had to go through something similar last week because my lens that I use for my camera, the primary one, broke while I was shooting women's tennis. So I don't know what happened. The autofocus just crapped out. And, obviously you can't shoot sports without autofocus. So I was like, okay, well, what do I do now? So I went to Hunt's Photo and Video, and that was totally a free ad, by the way. And I was like, hey, what would you recommend I do? How do I get this fixed? He was like, well, you have to send it to the manufacturer in New York, and, it'll take a couple weeks. I'm like, well, I can't afford to do that. So I was considering upgrading to the Canon R6 Mark II, which would have been $3,000 out of my pocket. And I don't have enough to spend that right now, or at least that's too big of a percentage
Yeah.
of what I do have. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll just replace the lens then. So I ended up getting a used 70 to 200 off of MPB for $850. That's still a lot of money, though. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. But great, like good lens, objectively.
No, definitely. It's an f2.8, so which is better than the f4, 5 to 6 that I had. And it's an internal zoom, so it doesn't extend. When you zoom in, the barrel doesn't extend. It just stays there and it zooms in for you, which is pretty nice. And I love having that so far. I've only shot one day with it, but it's been a good quality. So, but yeah, I definitely had to bite the bullet spending on that. It's been a while since we recorded, dude. It's been 3 weeks. I think the last time we recorded was with Calvin, and that was before the Central Connecticut State game here for football. I remember that was 2 days later. And that was so much fun. So that was my first football highlight reel that I got to do because, obviously because it was a win. And, dude, it was so much fun because they had a 70-yard touchdown. Maybe it was 50 to 60 yards that came right to me. So I'm in the corner of the end zone along the sideline, pass down the side, caught by the receiver. He runs right over to me, right through the end zone, right to my camera, and jumps up with his buddies right in front of me and then screams in my camera. It was so awesome. It was so awesome. And that's something that I'll remember forever, you know what I mean? So that was 3 weeks ago. I've just had a lot of schoolwork, midterms, obviously been working a lot. I just did hockey for the first time 2 days ago, which was awesome. I'm doing women's basketball media day tomorrow, which is going to be really fun. And yeah, I guess just really excited to see the upcoming sports. Oh, and I'm starting a new podcast for the club that I joined here, McCormick Student Leaders. And I'm going to be co-hosting the McCormick Student Leaders podcast. So that's going to be super fun. Hopefully we're starting soon. But what have you been up to since the last time we recorded?
Yeah, living life, man. And it's great to hear that you're in it and you're living it and you're loving it. And I'm it's so fantastic. I'm doing the whole job search thing, and I'm researching and applying to grad schools and really fine tuning, right, what you want to do with your life. And I think a lot of people on the podcast know who I am and kind of know pieces of my story. But if you don't, right, as Paul can attest, I was probably, if not the busiest guy at school during college at St. Joe's. I like to take a lot of my plate, and I keep myself busy.
Definitely one of, yeah, for sure, man. I mean, you were RA, soccer, school, and then, internships and swim team. And, yeah, you had a lot for sure.
And it's just one, great resume builder, great. It's great experience, but also
definitely
you realize I have poured so much of myself into all these things, and I still don't really know what I want to do, right? And I'm still trying to identify and find and you have those ideas of what you love because you've done internships and you've worked with people and you communicate, but you don't know this is who I am to a business, and this is what I want to pour my life into.
Right.
And obviously that
Yeah.
changes throughout the professional career. That's what people talk about.
Definitely.
But I've been spending a lot of time identifying that and figuring out, like, what do I have to do? What strategies do I have to take to be able to prepare myself for that? And also setting myself up for success as I look to go into grad school and get my master's. So super excited about that.
Yeah,
and I'm excited about the
definitely.
next journey.
I feel you with the applications thing, man. It's funny. I've only been here for a month and a half, but I'm already starting to hear about friends who are landing and applying for internships for next summer, and I'm like, wow, I guess I do need to get on it. And I happened to get an email from a professor the other day with an opportunity that I told you about last night that I'm going to be applying for. Hopefully that works out, but if not, I have a few other things that I have in mind. I mean, obviously, like I've told you my dream is the Bananas for next summer. That would be incredible. But I did see that they offer spring internships, so it's like January to April, and obviously I can't leave school to go do that. So I don't know. It's something I got to figure out. I've been trying to get in contact with Jesse and figure that out, but I don't know. We'll see. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I definitely have a few options that I'm thinking of. Nesson would be really cool. I like being in a production truck all summer. That would be awesome. And, if nothing else works out, I'll have my media company to fall back on and really focus on that. But that is kind of nice to have like that fallback, even if I don't land anything, which I mean, I hopefully expect to. At this point, I have a decent amount of experience, I think, at least for the point in my life that I'm at, and I'm getting a lot better with the videos since coming here. Like, they've taught me so many tricks, man, and given me so many resources where it's like, this is how you get better at doing what you do, and it's been super awesome. So definitely looking forward to that. But since we're on a limited time frame here, because I only have the room till for another half hour, let's get into what we're actually talking about today. And I know I just yapped for like most of that, so I'm sorry. But
No, you're good. You're good. Deep dive. Let's do it.
So what we're talking about today is the Dolphins could be potentially sold, or at least in part, to a private equity firm. That is $8.1 billion. That would be like pretty close to a record for the selling of a sports franchise. So it's Ares Management is who's looking to buy it, and they're looking to get a 10% stake in the Dolphins, Hard Rock Stadium, and the Miami Grand Prix. So I think of the $8.1 billion, if I had to guess, the most valuable thing is probably the Miami Grand Prix, because Formula One brings in stupid European money. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And it's also one of the fastest growing sports, especially in the U.S. market right now. Like,
yeah, for sure. Especially with
NASCAR's a strong American sport. You think about F1. F1 has the faster growing audience at the moment.
Definitely, yeah. And I think part of it is because F1 to some Americans is more consumable. You know what I mean? Because it's somewhere around 70 laps versus 500 laps. You know what I mean? So, like, it's easier to sit down on your couch and watch an F1 race than it is to sit down on your couch and watch an NASCAR race. And that's just the way it is. Really shows the sports landscape that we're in today, and how fast the value of franchises keeps increasing, and the value of venues. Because as our society starts to get more people and we build more things, there's less space to build big venues like this, like Hard Rock Stadium. And having that brand name Hard Rock on there also comes with a price too. But the reason that this is such a big deal is that if this passes, it would be the first time a private equity firm would be allowed to purchase a part of an NFL team. So what are your thoughts on that? Because we're starting to see this kind of trend of private equity going into sports. And I've talked about this with some of my friends. Obviously, Stroby's in investing, and he would love this topic. So that's who I thought of immediately when I picked this.
Absolutely. Definitely somebody we need to have on the podcast at some point.
Yeah.
He's a good shout out. And it's complicated, right? Because we've seen private investment and private equity firms in the European market frequently. Obviously, I always bring something back to soccer. I find a way how I find the connection. I don't know why. But, like, the European market in soccer, we've seen private equity. We've seen the Saudi investment fund. We've seen all these other things. Plus, you've seen groups like FSG, as you referenced, the City Group, right? You've seen Red Bull, right? all these people are private equity firms, are these groups that come and invest, right? And it's really strong in the European market. We see it a lot less in the quote unquote American market, right? You often see a more person, like a family, or maybe it's a really rich guy, right? Or maybe it's, that sounds really bad, but maybe it's a company or a business or like that sole entity, not something that's a combination of all these people, especially when you're only buying a partial share. So definitely super interesting to see. And it's a lot of the times why it's interesting to see is the US is where like they outspan from. So FSG is Red Sox, right?
Red Sox, Liverpool, the Penguins, PGA now, and they're trying to get part of an NBA team.
Precisely, right? So realistically, they outspan from the US. They are a US based organization, right?
Yeah.
Which is same with the, I wouldn't say Red Bull's a US based organization. That's not a good shout. But FSG is a prime example of where we span out from these things. So private equity is where it's going. Now, partially that is because the pricing and the expense of sports teams in operation, in terms of the value socially, the value economically, they are hubs, right? And the driving force of a lot of our societal aspects right now. You can go into psychology and just how humanity interacts with sport. It's a massive piece of it. So you have to realize of like, okay, what are the Miami Dolphins probably valued at? And then also take into the account of you're buying into other assets here of like, there's big value. And nobody can sit there and say, I'm going to spend $20 billion to buy all these things, right?
No, for sure not. Yeah.
But they want to be part of it for something that's a bit reasonable, something where, okay, I can see myself making my money back here, right?
It's like the value of sports franchises, like we were just mentioning, is so high right now that you almost have to be part of a group to buy into one of these franchises. Especially in the NFL, America's richest league right now. You have to be part of a group to buy into something. We saw the Commanders be bought for about $6 billion a couple of years ago, and there were several buyers within that group. And I think that's kind of the direction that private equity comes in, is they can say, hey, we are a contributing member. Our company is a contributing member of this group, and we will help you be able to actually afford what this is actually worth because it's gone up so much. So this is only possible due to the new ownership rules of the NFL, which was voted on in August and allowed up to a 10% stake to be sold to private equity firms. So with like the NFL franchises skyrocketing valuation and the pool of available buyers, like we were just talking about, getting smaller, does it make sense to you to seek help from private equity like we were just talking about? Is this like going to continue in the future? Is this kind of setting the tone for what we're going to see going forward when teams do come up to be sold?
Well, I think this is absolutely just a sporting trend in general, right? Outside of lower league teams, like maybe a Wrexham, where people that are quote unquote famous and rich can say, okay, I want to be part of this, but I also, there's an aspect of it, right? Where private equity, when you think about it, you don't have to be as involved, right?
Definitely.
Even like factually, if FSG is to acquire a team, FSG has a team of people that deal with their acquisitions, handle the negotiations, and strategize for how they are going to progress this organization, right?
Definitely.
How they are going to make it profitable, how they're going to make money, all these other things, right? So it removes a certain aspect of a per se, like let's give Tony Bloom for an example. And if you don't know, I'm a Brighton fan, right? Tony Bloom made millions, made lots of money through gambling. He was a famous gambler. And now he owns stakes in multiple different clubs, including Brighton, including Union Saint-Gilloise, right? Or Royal Union Saint-Gilloise, right? Big guy, big personality. He invested his money in sports teams because he's passionate about it. What he actually makes his money through is through his, per se, one success of his sports team, but they have an analytics side where they do really, really well. It's one of the leading analytic organizations in soccer, and that's why their teams are successful, right? They have this strategy. So this is the type of thing where you're not going to see people like, per se, a Tony Bloom buying into teams that are at that Miami Dolphins level, right?
Yeah.
A Brighton, isn't a Liverpool. It isn't a Man United. It isn't all these other things. Even if you look at the Man United acquisition from this summer, right? Radcliffe brought in a bunch of other personalities where you're able to go into it as a group, strategize, and actually seek to create value out of this. If you go into it as one person, it can be really overwhelming. And if you haven't watched Welcome to Wrexham, I know both Paul and I have, right? You go into it and you see that video of what are Ryan Reynolds and Paul McElhenney really experiencing, and oh my days, it's a lot. And it's really overwhelming as an owner to go and say, okay, we have to attack all of these different things. Well, private equity, wow.
You just said Paul McElhenney, by the way. I think you meant Rob.
I did. You're right. And I don't know why, but I apologize, Mr. McElhenney. Please don't kill me.
No, you're good. You're good.
But thank you for the correction. Rob McElhenney, yes.
I was like, in my head, I was like, wait.
That's a good
right,
check.
is it?
No, it's definitely not Paul. But thinking
Imagine
about
I
it,
own Wrexham. That would be kind of crazy.
the teams that they have is what makes it possible, what makes it viable, and what makes not rich people, but people who are looking to invest in sports see private equity as that next phase of we can do this, one, because it's a bit more affordable, two, because there's a team that's surrounding it, and three, because, well, right, that's how we have to do it now. And it's fantastic.
Great point about the team, and I didn't mean to characterize it as rich people. I should have characterized it, as you just said, as people looking to invest in teams. Because that's really what this is. And private equity groups are helpful with that because what do they do for a living? They assess what's the best thing to invest in, right? So having that can help an ownership group decide, do we really want to do this or do we not? You know, what is the valuation going to look like in 10 years? You know, are we going to make good profit off of this or are the costs too high? And I think having a group around you, like a private equity firm, to help you through those processes, sorry, I totally had to form that in the mind, can really be helpful for them. You know? And I think you're right. I think this is going to continue to grow in terms of the private equity is going to continue to help these ownership groups really be able to afford to do this, right? As we see valuations keep going up. So I have one more question, and this is more from a fan perspective, because we've been talking about it a lot from an ownership side of, you know, this is a good thing for the ownership groups because they get help, they get a team around them to help run their business. But from a fan perspective, when sports teams get treated like assets, which is, you know, what you start to get into when you bring private equity in, because they are asset managers. So from a fan perspective, when they started to get treated like that, do the owners start to care less about investing in the on-field product? Does it lose kind of that pizzazz for them where, you know, they really care about the success of the team and they're more looking at just their revenue numbers and what they should be investing in outside of on the field?
Right. And it's an excellent question because the reality is often fans point at stuff like FSG. Liverpool fans go and say, like, the questionable investment. Are they invested in the program? Are they invested in the product? And it's really hard to look at in an American market because in Europe, right, there's actually really, really strong incentives to your performance, right? Per se, if Liverpool were to say we're going to play a bunch of kids and get relegated, they're going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And nobody wants to do that, right? And that's an extreme example. But when you look at something like the Miami Dolphins, although there are performance incentives in the NFL, I think the performance incentives are slightly less, although they are still very
it's not
strong,
like a relegation
getting
system.
fans in the stadium. It's a bit tougher to really see how powerful it is and important that we perform well. So especially with private investment groups, the conversation often really becomes, are they invested in the program? Are they invested in this product? And do they want to see us grow? Or are they just trying to best handle their purse strings? Right. And that's a challenging conversation and creates a really difficult relationship between fans and owners. And we will really have to see it kind of adapt to a US market before we can totally understand it. But we will see. I think obviously people who are invested in these things are still sports fans. They still want to see their team succeed. Yeah. But there's also just a realization of there's a big financial component here. And there's an additional piece to that.
I mean, there is a reason, we call ourselves Sports Business Take because, it's becoming more and more apparent now that being involved in a franchise like this, it is run like any other business. It's how can we make the most profit? And from a sports fan perspective, that can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on, I guess, how good your team is doing and how much money you're bringing in or what kind of market you're in. But I think the private equity groups coming in and contributing some funds to purchases like this will be examples of ownership groups having more to spend on the field. You know what I mean? Maybe to flip it in a positive light and say, okay, now that we have this extra money coming in from these people, we can take more of our money and focus it on the field. And I hope that's where this goes. Personally, I think that would be kind of, like you said, there's kind of this gap now between owners and fans where they don't really understand each other, right? They don't have like a mutually beneficial relationship, I guess is what I was going to say. But I think that would start to close the gap, where I think fans would understand owners more and maybe the other way around as well. Because, like you said, of course owners are going to be fans of their teams. It's not like they're robotic, they're human too. So it's I guess, I think the private equity thing will help balance that gap.
Absolutely, well said. I totally agree, right? It's a type of thing where, okay, you're going to see smarter investments and you might see less in terms of talent acquisition, etc. But it really depends on the private equity firm's involvement, their strategies, and what really their brand is.
Right.
So it'll be super interesting to see, and it's super exciting. And
Yeah.
I'm excited to see it adapt to the NFL, right? Which has possibly one of the most interesting player acquisition pools and in all of these different things, right? You see these massive contracts every year. It's going to be super interesting.
Yeah. And, what you were talking about just made me wonder, how much influence are they going to have? You know what I mean? Like, we're still talking only about a 10% ownership stake. That's
True.
like in the big scheme of things, 90% of the team and stadium and the F1 thing is owned by other people. So,
Correct.
like, how much of a say are they really going to have? How much of an influence are they really going to have? Or how much are the owners, the majority owners of the team, going to use them as a resource and, kind of take their influence into consideration? So that'll be interesting to see, and that's something that we'll have to see happen. So I hope that this does go through so that we can see that play out, because I do think that this is the trend of where sports is going in terms of the purchase of franchises. We've already seen it with Spurs, with FSG, with AC Milan, potentially here with the Dolphins. All right, moving on from private equity into a little bit of NIL issues. So still money related. So this is a little bit of an old story now. Like we said, we haven't recorded in a couple of weeks, so this is probably 10 days old now. But let's talk about the UNLV quarterback, Matthew Sluka. So he left the UNLV football team ending his season after claiming that he was offered $100,000 by an assistant coach to transfer to UNLV. So that would be NIL money, $100,000, but only received $3,000 from the UNLV collective. So obviously, most of us who pay attention to college sports have heard about this story right now. What was your first thoughts on this?
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't talk today.
No, you're okay. You're talking fine, Paul. Don't hate on yourself that much. It's a difficult and challenging thing, right? When I read more into it, my thoughts go into like, what is this quote unquote UNLV collective, and are they properly leveraging like their connections?
Yeah.
And can they generate more assets for their athletes and revenue in that manner? Especially with NIL being this growing world, do we see colleges have like exclusive partnership departments? And maybe I think they probably do. Like, you have partnership professionals that are involved with that. But I think this could grow into an even bigger phase, right?
Yeah.
The secondary thought is like, okay, I go into contract law and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, what is this written or non-written but verbal contract and agreement between this guy and the coach recruiting him, and how does that fit into a college athlete contract, right?
Yeah.
Like, you are agreeing to be part of this program.
Yeah. How do you create a policy around, like, what do you do?
How do you create a policy around something that you can't control?
Right.
Right?
Exactly. which I think brings up the largest point in this story, which is that the UNLV collective was not directly tied in with the coaching staff and with the school. So I think we're going to reach a point where NIL needs to be tied directly to the school and not through a third party like a collective, and I think that is what we're going to see in a couple of years, because that way the school can just say, hey, we're promising you $100,000. We have to own up to that, and we're gonna have that in writing. Otherwise, you can sue us, essentially, and or you can just leave straight up. And that's what he did do. He just left because he didn't sign a contract or anything, so he didn't have to stay there. And now he can still retain his year of eligibility and go play elsewhere next year. But I really do think that that's the point we're reaching, because other athletes are going to follow this. They're going to say, hey, maybe I was promised something that I didn't get from the collective at my school. And, I see this quarterback has done this. Why can't I do the same thing? You know what I mean? So I really do think we're going to have to start seeing the NCAA create a policy around tying NIL directly to the school, because otherwise it's kind of the wild, wild west right now. You know what I mean? Where you can just do whatever you want. Collectives can promise pretty much whatever they want. Athletes can, like I just said in this case, leave, retain a year of eligibility, and play elsewhere next year, So I really think that's the direction that we're headed with this, but I don't know. How do you think that gets accomplished?
I think it's a good statement, and I think it's a good question too as well. Like, realistically, when you look at stuff like this and you look at how our society works and how the American both economy, capitalistic society, and all these other things in the sporting world, this is an industry defining case. I sit here and I look at this and I'm like, okay, one, how does this impact NIL negotiations, etc.? How does this affect in court? Is this going to go to court? Does this go to Supreme Court? Does this go to a decision making where NIL is going to have to be a lot clearer about what they're offering athletes?
Definitely.
Or like where is this gonna lie?
And how does it tie into the decision that's been made to pay athletes as employees now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very strong connection. Do the two interact? Does the NLI payments that the school can possibly generate revenue through, or the collective generate revenue through, go through to athletes as their payment, or is there a separate thing, right? How do you regulate sponsorships of programs versus sponsorship of teams versus sponsorship of athletes, right? There's all these different questions. How do you regulate what coaches are allowed to promise in these negotiations? How do you communicate this? And there's going to be a lot, again, as you said, it is the wild, wild west. And as we said before, there's a lot of changes coming to NIL. There's a lot of growth coming to NIL, but it's going to take time. It's going to take moments like this where really, honestly, I'm kind of sad for the quarterback, as like, yes, this is something you were promised, but also, right, you are choosing to not go to school for a year. As someone who's like, we can identify Zach loves school, right? I factually love education and learning, but stepping away from that, and maybe that's not his passion. Like, this is me for an example, but like taking a step away from schooling for a year is challenging, right? And then going back into it. And now he's like, okay, I'm going to go to the NFL after this and deal with this, but it is just an industry-defining case. And I feel bad for the guy because I know socially, psychologically, like, how is this going to impact him in his career? And super interesting to see how the story continues to unfold.
I think industry-defining case is the best way to put this. And I think it's, in a way, like, this is really cool that we're getting to live through the defining moments of what college sports is going to look like for the next 50 to 100 years. Like, what happens in the next 5 to 10 years around the policies around NIL and paying athletes, and how do the two interact? Are they separate? What does sponsorship look like for schools versus athletes, like you were just mentioning? That's going to get decided, let's say in the next decade. And once it does, that's going to be around for a long time. And the fact that we're getting to live through and talk about, and maybe even potentially shape, depending on where we end up in our careers, how this happens is really cool to me. I think the NCAA right now has a chance to dictate how their future is going to look for the next 50 years. And I think it is cases like this that will push them to write the policies that will do it.
Absolutely. Very well said. Very, very, absolutely fantastic take. I wanted to offer some context to this. We mentioned that a casino owner offered to pay the $100,000.
Yeah.
Right. So in terms of context of this, and I know many people have probably heard through Instagram, TikTok, other social media about
Yeah, I
this
saw it on
take,
Twitter.
about Twitter, thank you, or X. I don't know what we're calling it yet.
I call
About
it Twitter.
like what is going on here, right? Well, the guy did offer to pay the $100,000. What UNLV told him is the situation is already past that being an option, right? So
Yeah.
the athlete has already filed paperwork for the NCAA to redshirt. He's
And would that
already
even
taken
be
a step
legal
away.
with the NCAA? Because
I
then
think,
you're getting into
yeah,
muddy waters with sports betting, sponsoring athletes, and
correct.
like all the ethical questions that come around that.
Correct. And I think sports betting, an excellent point, right? The sports betting is the massive question here of like, because I know sports betting sponsors are a massive issue in Europe, especially in like they're legal in the Prem, but they're not legal in the Liga. They're not legal in other leagues. So actually, there's a team, and I don't remember who it was, that actually traveled in the Champions League to Sevilla in Spain, and they had to change their jersey sponsorship because they weren't allowed to have a betting sponsor while they were playing the game in Spain, which is super interesting. And it'll be interesting to see like how the U.S. handles that. And I think the U.S. being a massive sports betting country, we know we are all slightly degenerates, and it's okay. Call myself up. It's realistically like I think the U.S. is totally going to support that, but also that's a question that we have to ask for a different day and something the NCAA really has to dive into. So there's a lot more to be determined, but I did want to share the fact that like the money was offered.
Yeah, and I wonder if it hadn't been from a casino, if UNLV would have taken it. You know what I mean?
The thing is, like, okay, I don't think they could have. The athletes already.
I don't think it's legal.
The paperwork's not even the could have like legality wise. I think the contract has already been broken, right? So there's no like he's already applied to redshirt for the NCAA. The NCAA has already approved it. He's already taken a step away from the team. He can't walk back in like, oh yeah, I'm the shit, right? What does that make?
He can't come back.
Pardon my French, but what does that make the coaching team look like? What does that make the school look like? Oh my days. And I'm going to say again, part of my French, they look like his little bitch. Like, objectively.
No, definitely.
And that's like, that sounds horrible coming out of my mouth, and that's not like the way that I want to say it, but they look like that.
The power is completely in his hand.
Correct. And the school's like, okay, well, we can't just say that, because what happens when our star running back says, well, he got $100,000. I only got $3. I'm walking away too, bro. Come on, give me my money. Right? Like, what does the chain reaction create of, okay, yes, per se, an athlete can do that, but as a school, is it ethical for them to allow that? Right? Where does this come in also?
Right. I think we also have to realize like schools aren't built of unlimited money. You know what I mean? There's only so much to go around. Unless you crank tuition costs up to a point where people just can't afford to go to college anymore, which we've talked about as a potential side effect of, athletes being employees. We've talked about that on this podcast, and I really hope that doesn't happen. And I hope that this case doesn't contribute anything to that possibility. But I do think that you are right in the sense that it is going to be an industry-defining case where we see whatever the next step in NIL policy is will be referenced to this case. You know what I mean? This will influence whatever the next step of NIL is. I don't know if it's going to be different by sport, because that's a possibility too. There could be different NIL rules for, big money sports like football and basketball versus something like soccer or tennis. You know what I mean? That's up to the NCAA to decide, and that's something that they're going to have to look at too, is how do we distribute our money with this new money coming in from sponsors, as well as having to dish more money out to athletes. So it's really this gigantic balancing of funds, and to make that work within a really countrywide system it's a process. It's going to take time, but I do think that like this should be their main focus right now, is like we have to lock in the direction that we're going for a long time.
Well said, and I absolutely agree. Right? We really need like some good industry definition here, and schools have to decide what is our policy going to be on this type of stuff, and if an athlete decides to walk away, like how are we going to handle that? There has to be policies, and UNLV are being industry leaders here of saying like the schools are going to be about, or at least they are going to be a bit stricter about it. They're not going to allow that to happen, and athletes really have to define like and think about how am I going to handle if this situation happens to me, right? What is that reality? So a lot of industry definition to do here. Great take.
Definitely. All right, man. I think that's about all I have for today. My time is just about up. For those who are listening, have a great week, and hopefully we will be back next week, potentially with a guest. We'll see. Kind of waiting on that, so we'll see. But thank you guys as always for listening, and we will see you soon.
See you soon.